"Get out!" The word cut through the thunder, cold and final. Rain poured into the doorway as Amara stood frozen, her husband's hand gripping the frame, his mistress smirking just behind him. In that instant, everything she had given, every vow she had kept, was tossed aside like nothing. The storm swallowed her whole, drenching her body but not her dignity. What Daniel didn't know was that the woman he cast out was not walking away empty-handed. She was walking back into power. This is the story of a wife betrayed and a billionaire's daughter rising. The night air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the moonlight, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for something grim. Inside the grand suburban mansion, Amara crept, tidying up the remnants of another long evening. To the world, she was the picture of elegance, a young black woman who had married into wealth, loved deeply, and carried herself with dignity. But behind the polished doors of her husband's estate, shadows loomed that outsiders could never see. Her days were often filled with small humiliations she never voiced, an ignored smile at the breakfast table, whispers of not good enough that came not from her lips, but from the eyes of those around her. She tried to convince herself that marriage was a test, that patience and love would eventually dissolve the coldness in her husband's heart. After all, wasn't that what she had vowed, to stand through storms? But storms come in many forms. Sometimes they're in the skies, and sometimes they're in the eyes of the one you trust most. Tonight, both were brewing. Her husband, Daniel, had grown distant in ways too sharp to ignore. Late-night calls, perfumed traces on his shirts, and a smug confidence that seemed less about love and more about conquest. Amara felt it, a truth she wished she could unsee, pressing against her like the humid air outside. And yet, she stayed. Not because she lacked strength, but because walking away meant admitting defeat, and she was not raised to give in so easily. She carried her father's resilience in her bones, though few in this house knew the man she came from. To them, she was just Daniel's wife. To herself, she was still her father's daughter. On this stormy night, as thunder rumbled and rain threatened to break, Amara sensed that the fragile balance of her life was about to shatter. What she did not yet know was that when the storm came, it would strip away masks, expose cruel truths, and awaken a power she had almost forgotten she had. The storm finally broke, sheets of rain lashing against the windows like nature's warning drum. Inside, Amara's hands trembled as she folded a blanket across the couch, pretending not to hear the faint laughter drifting from the upstairs hall. It wasn't hers. It hadn't been hers for months. The sound was feminine, careless, and cruel, as though mocking her very presence. She turned toward the staircase just in time to see Daniel descending, his tie loosened, his smirk sharp as a blade. Behind him, a woman followed, tall, blonde, and brimming with arrogance. She didn't even bother to look away when her eyes met Amara's. Amara's stomach twisted, but she stayed silent. She had swallowed silence for so long it had almost become natural. Daniel thrived on it. He knew that as long as she said nothing, he could play both sides, husband in public, betrayer in private. But tonight was different. There was a fire in the air, and he seemed almost eager for confrontation. "You don't belong here," he said coldly, his hand brushing against the woman's waist as if to drive the knife deeper. The words cut deeper than the rain outside. It wasn't just dismissal. It was erasure. As though the years she had given him, the love she had poured into this home, were nothing but wasted breaths. The mistress smirked, her eyes gleaming with victory. She stood there like a queen crowned by cruelty, watching as Daniel reached for the front door. Amara's breath caught. He couldn't mean it. Not in this storm. Not like this. But his hand was steady, his grip on the handle unshaken. With one swift pull, the door swung open and the storm roared inside. "Get out!" he commanded. The words echoed, carried by thunder. For a moment, Amara stood frozen. Rain sprayed across her dress, chilling her to the bone, but the cold wasn't from the storm. It was from betrayal, final and sharp. Slowly she stepped forward, her dignity the only thing holding her upright. She walked past him, past the mistress who chuckled under her breath, and into the raging night. Each step onto the soaked driveway felt like walking away from the life she had built, the love she had defended, and the dignity she had fought to maintain. The rain plastered her hair to her face, soaking her dress until it clung like chains. She didn't look back. Not once. Behind her, Daniel shut the door with finality. To him, it was over, an inconvenience removed, a new chapter begun with his mistress at his side. But he had miscalculated. He had forgotten something Amara never flaunted, something she rarely even spoke of. Her father. Amara's father was no ordinary man. He was a billionaire with a name that carried weight in boardrooms and on city streets. He was a man who built empires from ashes, who knew what storms felt like and how to bend them to his will. Daniel had always underestimated that connection, mocking it in private, dismissing Amara as a woman clinging to borrowed power. But bloodlines do not vanish in the rain. Soaked and heartbroken, Amara wandered, her feet splashing through puddles until headlights pierced the darkness. A familiar car slowed beside her, the tinted window rolling down to reveal the face she had almost forgotten she could lean on. Her father's eyes widened at the sight of her drenched, trembling form. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. His silence was not Daniel's cruel dismissal. It was fury contained, waiting to strike, and in that moment, as Amara collapsed into the warmth of his car, she realized the storm wasn't hers to carry alone anymore. It was just beginning. And this time, Daniel would be the one left out in the cold. The next morning, the mansion that had once been Daniel's sanctuary turned into his stage of reckoning. He strolled into the dining room with his mistress at his side, smug and unshaken, until the sound of tires crunching against the driveway cut through the silence. A sleek black car pulled up, its presence commanding attention even before the door opened. Out stepped Amara's father, his stature towering, his gaze sharp enough to slice through walls. Daniel's smirk faltered. He had always mocked Amara's connection to her father, calling it an empty boast. But standing before him now was not a rumor. It was power personified. The mistress shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that this was no ordinary man. Without a word, the billionaire entered the house. His eyes swept over Daniel, not with curiosity, but with the weight of judgment. The silence was suffocating. Then came his voice, measured, controlled, yet echoing with fury restrained. He spoke of betrayal, of cruelty, of the inhumanity of casting his daughter into the storm like disposable trash. Each word was a blow, not shouted but carved into Daniel's pride. Daniel tried to protest, his arrogance flickering like a dying flame, but the room no longer belonged to him. Documents followed, proof of debts, contracts tied to companies under the billionaire's reach. Daniel's empire, it turned out, was built on sand, and now the tide was sweeping in. In that instant, the roles reversed. The man who had laughed at Amara now stood stripped, powerless, trembling before the storm he had unleashed. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments! Daniel's downfall came not with a single strike, but with a series of quiet, calculated moves. Within hours of that confrontation, phones began ringing, contracts were revoked, and partnerships dissolved. The very men who once praised Daniel's confidence now distanced themselves, unwilling to risk offending the billionaire whose influence stretched across industries. In a single day, Daniel's empire began to crumble. Not because Amara's father shouted, but because his power spoke louder than any voice could. For Amara, the pain of betrayal still lingered, but she no longer carried it alone. Wrapped in her father's embrace, she remembered who she was before Daniel tried to strip her of worth. She was not just a wife discarded in the rain. She was the daughter of a man who had weathered storms far fiercer than this. And in that truth, she found her strength again. The mistress, once so smug, vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Without Daniel's wealth to shield her, she retreated into obscurity, leaving him to face the wreckage of his choices alone. He was left with nothing, no wife, no empire, no legacy, only the memory of the night he thought he had won. But the actual impact stretched beyond Daniel. It was a reminder to anyone watching that dignity cannot be bought, and cruelty carries a cost. For every storm endured, there is a dawn that reveals truth. And sometimes that truth arrives with the force of justice itself. Amara's story was not just about betrayal, but resilience. She walked away not broken, but renewed, her father's presence reminding her that storms may strip away illusions, but they also reveal strength, and strength, once awakened, can never again be silenced.